Thank you for joining us. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. This is a much requested webinar that I have recruited two of my favorites, Julius Damato and Bryan Lyons, to join to walk us through which of the assistants you should be using, what is working best for our clients, and what some of the feedback that we have seen. So with that said, I will turn it over to them. Just a few moments of housekeeping. We love this to be interactive. I always joke Julius's favorite thing is to answer questions regarding Copilot. So we've brought Bryan to come along to answer all the other ones. So with that said, our Q&A button is right up at the top. Please feel free to submit. They'll try to interject in their presentation, and we'll also have time at the end for Q&A. Anyone registered for the webinar, we will send this all to your email tomorrow, so you'll have a recording along with any of the notes in the presentation. So with that said, I'm going to turn things over to Julius, and please feel free, as I said, to ask some questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. So welcome, everybody. Again, I'm Julius Damato, Director of Microsoft Modern Workplace and AI Solutions here. I'm joined again with Bryan Lyons, who's Principal Consultant for Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365. As Jen said, hot topic, everyone's favorite conversation today is which tool are you using or not using, and it changes weekly. So this will all be relevant today and tomorrow, who knows. So importantly, we'll cover kind of platform overviews, talk a bit about the features and the stacks, how each platform has different native agents and experiences to really kind of focus in on where you kind of get the best bang for the buck there. And important for what Bryan and I talk about quite a lot is around data protection and governance, why it's important today, why it really needs to be leveraged more, and kind of really focusing in and honing in on there. And then we'll touch base on kind of best fit scenarios. There's a framework in here as well that you'll get as a copy of the presentation as well. That'll cover kind of a decision on which tool, when, and where. Because obviously one tool is not best fit for everything. But we'll chit chat about this today. And again, as mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in. We'll answer them throughout the training the education or the session. Words are hard this morning. And we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So why does this all matter today? Great question. So importantly, AI adoption is obviously going through the roof. 88% of organizations use at least one AI tool for at least one business function. 3x Fortune 500 companies have deployed triple the amount of AI tools than they did the year prior. 2/3 of enterprises have not scaled AI beyond pilots, which is an interesting conversation depending on what side of the spectrum you are in that conversation. And there's a little over $2.5 trillion worth of global spend, up 44% year over year on AI. So companies are investing money regardless of kind of size. And importantly, it's a matter of picking the tool and sticking with it and not really choosing the wrong one. So the platforms we're talking about today, ChatGPT Enterprise, Claude Enterprise, and Microsoft 365 Copilot, are really not the wrong choices. Any one of them are good fit, and it's a matter of making sure that you have made their choice kind of cleanly with the right decision matrix in place so that you're really using it as the accelerator. Flip-flopping between tools, flip-flopping between models doesn't necessarily net you significant return on investment. It more or less confuses and infuriates end users. It makes it difficult for you to kind of streamline and get into real workflows, which is where AI really starts to excel. That's kind of the Microsoft motion versus the ChatGPT Claude, where you're doing everything as an individual user. But we'll chit chat about this a bit more as we kind of run through here as well. So when we look at kind of the three different platforms, right, Claude Enterprise, ChatGPT Enterprise, and Microsoft 365 Copilot, they're very much kind of in similar lights, where Claude Enterprise is really meant to be more safety first. It's reasoning first. It's really designed to be more open than the other platforms. That comes with inherent risks, obviously. ChatGPT Enterprise is more general focus, general purpose now, has broad capability, broad availability, very familiar since, the first one out typically wins, for those who are familiar with that phrase. And then for Microsoft 365 Copilot, its really biggest rise to fame is it's already grounded, already built into all the tooling you already have. There's no separate plugin you have to manage. There's no separate deployment you need to do. And importantly now, after several partner calls that I've been on with Microsoft at wee hours of the day to talk through what their vision should be and how they're going to be pivoting, they're more going to be focused on being an orchestrator now versus like kind of mask what model they're using, which was a big ask from partners. And you'll probably saw that yesterday as a part of their release for Copilot Cowork, as well as kind of some of the other pieces around changes to researchers. So we'll talk a bit about those throughout here as well. But when you look at what they do and like their philosophies, they're all generally the same across the board, as being, AI focused, being grounded, being able to use data there appropriately. And their approaches is really where it starts to differ. So Claude Enterprise is really trying to be best in class with their reasoning, and then again be MCP focused. So if you're familiar with MCP or multimodal context protocol, you being able to connect any data source that you may want to it in order to drive outcomes. That comes with inherent cost implications and being able to use it there. Whereas ChatGPT is really trying to be all-in-one platform with unlimited usage, and they do have kind of the largest user base still today when you look at per platform. And then Microsoft's approach is, again, as I mentioned, shifting to be multimodal, but with governance baked in it being governance first on day one. So you get all the logging, whether you're using free Copilot, paid Copilot, and any of the models in between there, you get all that logging inherent with the platforms. When we look at differentiators, again, Anthropic's is it being open to any tooling. ChatGPT being 700 million users, really brand recognition and talent familiarity. And then for Microsoft, it's again Microsoft Purview being able to tie it into Defender. They're looking at agents and AI usage at being identity first, so treating identity as a gateway. So it's a little bit of a different practice on how these tools will expand, and which one wins we'll see as the tools kind of start to adjust. So when we look at Claude Enterprise, right, huge context windows of many of you have gotten notifications about if you're subscribed to their service. So you can do a 1 million token context window now. So it really is kind of the industry leading for long-term document analysis. They do support ZDR or zero data retention, so it applies to their API endpoints and Claude Code, but only on the enterprise plan. It doesn't cover web or desktop, which is a very common misconception. So if you enable ZDR, know that's only applying to the API endpoint, and it also disables your compliance logging to some degree, but can talk about that if you're interested more. Really where Claude Enterprise shines is you can do a VPC isolation. That's where you basically take their AI platform, you put it in a little bucket, and you can host that in AWS or in GCP. It's also expanding into Azure as well shortly. So you can take a bucket of Claude and put it there so that you have total control. That gives you regional control, it gives you better networking control, but it does break and removes you from kind of the standard general release cycle, which is, again, a topic we can discuss. But really what they're trying to do is be more collaboration focused, really bringing people into light, and that's really one of the bigger differentiators in the product space. When we look at features and capabilities, they're using Opus 4.6, Sonnet 4.6 are really what they're using for extended thinking, vision, code support, etc. Projects and skills are there for being able to get end users to really focus in on pieces of there. With their security architecture today, it is here in the US. They're expanding obviously to other regions over time. It's a big reason they partnered with Microsoft, was to get better on their compliance game and get into being able to have their stuff hosted outside of the US. So if you're in the EU, you do need to be careful about using Anthropic or Claude if you're not going the VPC route, since your data does transmit here to the States. So if you have GDPR compliant data, you're at risk there of being out of compliance. From identity and access, they have one of the weakest RBAC controls. It's just owner and admin and user, so you don't have granular control over who can have access to what features, when and where. It's kind of all on or all off, which is something that many clients are not very happy about, but that's also kind of the AI industry from a SaaS platform as a whole, which you'll see a little bit throughout here. From auditing and compliance, you do get 30-day audit retention on there that can be expanded. If you have the enterprise plan, you can directly integrate with a SIM tool, whether that be through Splunk, Datadog, Elastic. Importantly, their API comes with a fee. Ingesting that data comes at a fee on your end because you have to store that data. And importantly, you're relying on bringing a tool to analyze what's happening in the platform instead of it being in-platform analyzed. And it's not yet journalable unless you have some other forwarding mechanism to get it into Gorilla or Smarsh. So if you're interested in journaling that content, it's something to be mindful of, as that's not natively supported yet. And when we look at kind of native agents in the experiences that's there, everyone's familiar with Claude Cowork and Claude Code. Their extended thinking across the models. Computer use is currently in research preview only on Mac OS. So if you have a Mac and you want to try and use that natively, That's how you get to that. Their core experiences is projects, artifacts, which went GA pretty recently, as well as having interactable visualizations, so you can have content dynamically update in stream is really where it does shine as a tool, and a lot of that capabilities is coming across in different aspects. They did in research preview, they did ask schedule tasks, so you can schedule co-work and or skills to run at a scheduled time, which comes again with inherent risk running it on an endpoint. And that's really where you'll see here. A thing I want to call out is you'll see kind of on this slide, a lot of the stuff that they are offering is in research preview or beta or preview. So a lot of the stuff is not necessarily GA, and that comes with SLA problems. It comes with general supportability. As Bryan will tell you, we have 8 open cases with Anthropic to get the Microsoft 365 connector to work. A lot of the stuff that they're offering is in early preview, so do understand that as it comes there. Obviously, the newer comer in the space when it comes to their general SaaS platform, but it does come with the fact that they're a lot more nimble in offering up features today. We had the same conversation about how ChatGPT was a couple years ago, where they were really innovating. Some say they've become stagnant, which will hopefully change here in a couple of weeks. But that's really where that's going. But a lot of the stuff is in preview that comes with, again, as I mentioned, SLA risk. It does come with concerns about where data is going, how it's being used with their platform, since their training, coaching, and tutoring aspect only applies to generally available features. So they may not directly transform their models, but they'll change UI elements based on feedback and things of that nature, and you'll see that change pretty regularly. But from a feature perspective, it is pretty broad. It does give people a lot of flexibility in being able to use different aspects there.
Julius, quick question on that. You're talking about general availability and things that are in preview. You and I experienced it yesterday. These two are at the speed of light. Do you not? I mean, I understand you're saying some of these integrations are different. Do you not see a lot of these changes coming rapidly and a bit unpredictable in some way of the features coming online? Some of them are in research preview and they turn on the next day, and some of them take an extended period of time. So in other words, kind of the roadmap of some of these platforms is hard to foresee. Is that fair?
That's very fair. The only one I know that produces a predictable roadmap, I'll say, is Microsoft. So there's a website for those who are interested. I can share it, where you can see the weekly changes of Microsoft 365 Copilot, that what goes in production, as well as there's the optionality to look at the roadmap for futures. They have their rollout planning. If any of the clients here get my what's new in Microsoft 365 Copilot from me, you will see kind of a bit of that there as well. But as features roll out, we do see features that come out of private previews. I'm using some of the Microsoft verbiage here, but it comes out of private preview, goes straight into public, and then goes kind of streamlined into general availability very quickly. So it's kind of some features stay, some features go, some get folded in, and that'll become apparent on a couple of the next slides. But that's where like the speed of this is really what's driving when features come in and features come out.
Okay, perfect.
So Sat asks, which one is better for Excel add-in, Copilot or Claude? Oh, we'll get there in a second, because that is a hot topic when we get it and we start covering what Microsoft's kind of bringing to the table. But great question. So when we look at what ChatGPT Enterprise brings, right, they have the most familiar model access that people are mostly aware of. This more starts to apply for model nerds. And this is where we start talking about where are people looking for a tool? Were people looking for the SaaS solution? Are people looking for the actual access to the model to build their own AI tooling? Are people looking for specific aspects of the feature set? And that's where you start to look at these different platforms holistically. There'll be a slide that covers a bit more of this in a couple of sections. But ChatGPT is the most familiar model availability, right? So 4.0, 01, 03, all the fun stuff that do there, 5.4, Copilot, you can go all the way down to 5.1 if you wanted to. On the ChatGPT side, for ChatGPT, you do have the ability to build custom GPTs. You can publish them to the GPT store, so they're more org-wide instead of laser focused in on kind of every user can build their own thing. From a data handling perspective, they also do honor, they're the first ones to do it with no training on commercial terms. And you can opt in for certain feedback, which is a really nice add. Claude recently added your ability to not have their data, They recently added the toggle so that you can turn off the feedback loop to Claude, so you're not sending them your prompt and your data when a user thumbs up, thumbs down, which is nice to see. Their code interpreter is in chat for Python execution. It does file processing and data visualization. There's no setup that has to happen. With Claude Enterprise, you'll see you have to turn on certain aspects of the platform so it can pull Python, add certain plugins for it to be able to generate content, whereas ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot have a very focused, like, here are the tools that you can use, nothing else. From a security perspective. And then we talk about kind of workspace controls. A lot of it comes down to role-based permissioning, right? They have one of the most mature ones versus Microsoft. And then you are able to set up certain domain-approved actions, things of that nature. That is, again, exclusive to enterprise, not business. AI capability, as I mentioned, you have full model suite, you have custom GPTs, the ability to use Canvas, they have deep analysis, you can use the Dalai Lama for image generation, web browsing. They are SOC 2 type compliant, importantly, just because their platform doesn't mean that when you set up the platform, you don't have to toggle the toggles to make it, so you do need to do review, and don't just take blanket. They're SOC 2, so that means I inherit that by default. Just means they are, so you have to make sure you have the controls in place there. They do have compliance logging, which is something ChatGPT Enterprise, Claude Enterprise, has as well. But importantly, they are set up with 8 different e-discovery partners so that you can directly integrate that. There's no fancy setup of key sharing, anything like that. It's native connector support. So they'll auto-rotate the key, do all the fun stuff that you should be doing when you do stuff directly with APIs in platform there. And importantly, is it's more human legible. That's a big thing that a lot of people don't realize. With Claude Enterprise, you're going to stream that data in. You need to do a large number of transformation on what comes across that API, so it's human legible. Because we don't all sit here and read JSON our whole lives. So it's something to keep in mind there from that. And then those same 8 e-discovery partners also apply for DLP. So that'll cover, Smarsh, Forcepoint, Global Relay, Microsoft Purview, our preferred one, Netscope, Palo Alto, and Zscaler is full support there. And when we look at kind of what is part of the native experiences, right, you'll see that this list is a lot less than what Claude Enterprise is. But importantly, you'll see is everything is largely generally available. They do have a few features that are in preview that aren't on here. It's just they cover a different aspect of what ChatGPT Enterprise offers. But their default agent modes generally available has been around for a while. Same thing with Codex programming. Their advanced data analysis or code interpreter, again, for inline execution, is arguably one of the best. You are able to do stuff with their connectors. They've switched the naming over to apps. They're taking a Microsoft approach to renaming things on the fly. And then you are able to build custom ones for the org, publish them in an enterprise platform. So again, really centralize that versus where you look at Claude, you can do stuff with skills and plugins, but from a general kind of enterprise perspective, publishing those, they exist, but you're not forcing users to use that one, if that makes sense. So people can go and download any skill they want and run it, versus with ChatGPT Enterprise, you do have fine granular controls that say you can only use company-approved GPTs, things of that nature, which is a big lacking feature on the enterprise side for Claude. When we look at kind of a bigger part of the core, they were the first ones to have memory and workspace context support. They were the first to do multimodal reasoning across, so it'll pick which model that they offer to best suit the action there versus the brute force Claude approach, where they've built a general model to handle it all kind of in-house and then use code or other aspects of other models to bring in to answer the question. So that'll be, then we get to the compatibility comparison chart, that'll be a little bit more apparent. And then one thing that's unique for ChatGPT Enterprise is they have their own AI web browser that you can use as part of theirs. But Microsoft has the same thing as well. When you look at Microsoft Edge, everybody's preferred web browser, where you can call Copilot there. That'll have its own agent mode as well. For those who are interested in kind of the new AI browser support or browser experience. Now, to everyone's favorite, Microsoft 365 Copilot, it arguably has the deepest integration for the pure Microsoft experience. So if you're all in on Microsoft, which most of our clients are, believe it or not, it really becomes the right choice. You don't have to worry about graph connectors. You're not worrying about data being indexed or stored elsewhere. You get the same enterprise data security and governance controls that come with the standard Microsoft data protection, so you're not worrying about where your data lives, data residency, things of that nature. It is built largely on OpenAI. That is no surprise to some or to most, but they also have custom models like the Bing Prometheus engine that's used for orchestration for web search. It does do Microsoft graph grounding. Really, it is an engine for response. As you all know, Anthropic was added in back in November for Frontier. It's reached general availability for Researcher. It'll be in the main Copilot chat as available through Sonnet here in the next week or two. So won't be locked behind beta or Frontier for you to be able to use Sonnet with your Microsoft 365 tenant. Thing of mentioning there as well is all US-based tenants have the ability or should have already had Anthropic models turned on by default. If you're a client in the EU or outside of US territory, your tenant is not turned on by default, just again due to data residency. So if you're in the EU, Singapore, Hong Kong, etc., and you want the native Copilot Anthropic experiences, you have to go turn that feature on and then do understand. Again, your data will be transmitted here to be used and then back. They have accelerated that timeline, just to talk about that feature for a moment. So originally that was going to be Q3. They're really pushing for Q2 to have more availability in the EU as well as in APAC. So stay tuned for when that kind of rolls out for those who don't want to turn that on today for data residency. But when we talk about data governance, because that's a pretty good segue, they have the most advanced one that is available. So it ties directly into Microsoft Purview, again, honoring all the other tenant controls that you have in place, whether it be data labeling, DLP control, and etc. And then from an extensibility layer of where it can connect to, you can build agents in Copilot Studio, you can build agents in the agent builder, you can rely on the graph, the Power Platform, use the integrated connectors. There's over 24,000 of that all available today to really extend what Copilot can do if you're a maker. Key thing there is Microsoft's Maker Platform is arguably one of the more mature ones, and you're able to connect to virtually any data source, which is a very common misconception where we talk to clients that say, oh yeah, it only works with Microsoft 365. That's really not true anymore. That was true when it first launched, but if you have data in Box, Dropbox, Ignite, data in SQL servers, you have stuff in managed SQL in Azure, you want to connect to anywhere that you can pull data in the Fabric or OneLake, you have that capability. Salesforce is native, Jira, we have ServiceNow, Jira, and our Salesforce instance connected to our Copilot, so I can just naturally ask questions about content, and it's all indexed and it's searchable. So it's stuff that you can do as well natively. And then we look at the feature stack. As mentioned, Microsoft is referred to as an orchestrator. So its model availability is really whatever Microsoft decides to partner with, whether that be ChatGPT, whether it be Anthropic. If you're in Copilot Studio, you can leverage XAI if that's something that you want to do natively in Copilot Studio, but they're going to be adding additional vendors and additional model options over the course of this year through strategic partnerships. So that's something where Microsoft has the edge of really vendor and model agnostic, not forced to use just one. From a security stack perspective, they have, again, one of the most matures, and Microsoft's approach is if you're building agents, they should have an identity. This way you can govern, control, permission, license them just like you would a normal employee. So that's really where Microsoft is kind of differentiating how they look at models or agents, to offer that. Again, Purview does their DLP controls, so that has total data handling across that, and then nothing you do with Microsoft 365 leaves your compliance boundary. So everything stays, air quote, in tenant. It's sending the vectorized version of data over to the model to respond, and then that interaction is purged once it leaves the handshake back to your tenant. So nothing is ever used for training, coaching, or management from that perspective. When we look at the native agents and experiences, there's a ton here. There are more. This is just what could fit in a nice slide nicely. So it is kind of the most feature rich when we talk about what is really being offered. So a lot of clients have signed up for Otter or Firefly, all the other like note-taking apps for meetings that exists in Microsoft as facilitator. A number of clients I've talked to signed up for services to do translations in meetings. That's Interpreter. You do get access to Researcher and Analyst, which Researcher just recently changed as well under Frontier to be even more transparent on the modeling. So you get a tremendous amount here. AI and SharePoint's becoming a really big thing for you to be able to automatically set up metadata, be able to automatically fill in content, forms, things of that nature that exist in SharePoint. So that's really expanded. And important on that is Microsoft has added the Anthropic reasoning behind that, as well as access to skills that they're approving for use in SharePoint. So you'll get the same skills that will exist on the Anthropic marketplace to a degree inside of SharePoint natively. So that'll be nice to see without having to, again, sign up for another service to offer that. In Frontier, the app builder, workflows is really nice where you can call agents based on other aspects of what you're doing from a Power Platform perspective. There's surveys that I know a number of clients are using internally for questionnaires. So you do get a tremendous amount. Agent mode has been rebranded, which Bryan and I disagree with the naming, but that's now called Edit with Copilot, which yes, naming, but really what they've done with Pages and Notebooks to make that a really AI canvas for editing is really transformative for a lot of the clients that we do education with. Copilot also has full memory support. Copilot Search can search across anything that's connected to your Microsoft 365 tenant. They have no-code, low-code offerings with Agent Builder and Copilot Studio for those who want to air quote make, or if you're enterprise and you want to build big agents to do agentic systems, you can build that in Copilot Studio and or leverage Microsoft Foundry through that native connector. So really rich in what you get. And again, it's not just laser focused on being a chat with some skills to do some off things. It's the agent and experiences they offer do step on a couple of other products in different spaces. So it's something to look at from that regard as well. So when we look at the comparison chart, which I alluded to before, just to talk a bit through with that, is really what their flagships there are is everyone knows the Opus and Sonnet models, and ChatGPT has 5.4 available in Microsoft Copilot. It's whatever models they offer up that they're able to containerize and offer in the core experience. And importantly, is you can go back and forth between OpenAI and Claude. That's a new experience that's in Frontier where it'll just automatically switch between the model based on user intent. So this is where your conversation and your prompting becomes a lot more important because then you can kind of help steer some of it. When you look at context,
Julius,
yes.
Can I chime in there? Can you talk through what's the difference of a model? How would someone decide Opus versus Sonnet? Why does a multi-model benefit? And to the novice, brand new user, why do I care? How do I not just open Claude and use it and open ChatGPT? How do I choose a model? What does it mean?
So that's a great question. It's also one that is arguably difficult to answer. The real way it comes down to is the way that Bryan and I often coach it is when you're using ChatGPT or Claude Enterprise and you're picking your model, think of it as like, what employee would you go to ask that question? Is it something that requires multiple steps? Is it something that requires deep thinking? Or is it something where you ask Jenny in accounting for a number and she gives you the number, right? So it really just comes down to kind of the type of question you're asking is when you pick between the model. They are working on their orchestrators so that, again, user intent will automatically pick the model. That's where I argue Copilot's a little bit ahead, where as long as your prompt is good enough with Copilot, it'll just automatically switch to deep thinking if it needs to. So that's where that really becomes a bigger differentiator is in what's referred to as the orchestration of the prompt.
Okay.
I would just add really quickly that to your question about the kind of general user, for the most part, they really shouldn't be trying to think about which model selection. Like, that gets into an idea that we have about cognitive load on the end user and how much they're expected to kind of manage the AI itself versus just ask the AI to do the thing. And especially starting out, it should really be ask the AI to do the thing until it's not really a decision you're thinking about. It's just a thing that you know. And that becomes second nature as you use everything. So
that's a good point. And then just to talk through a couple of things from a max context perspective, we did talk about how Opus does have 1 million tokens that existed already in ChatGPT Enterprise. It just kind of went under the radar, but since Claude is the new hot thing, that's why it jumped on there. For Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's a very common question I get is they don't publicly disclose what the orchestrator's max content is, but it is model dependent. So as ChatGPT and Claude added 1 million, it automatically was inherited as Microsoft adds those models to the core offering of Copilot. So you will see the 1 million token when you're using the ChatGPT experiences via Copilot versus with the Claude. Once that gets folded in, that'll be more relevant there. When we talk about agentic automation, which is what a lot of clients are looking at for using Claude Cowork or Claude Code, that exists there. ChatGPT has their own flavor, right? It's Codex, but then you use custom GPTs with assistant APIs to have it automate and do the flow there. On the Microsoft front, you do have a lot of options. There is the agent experience that we mentioned before directly in the Office apps. You can do a lot with Copilot Cowork now that is under Frontier, which we can talk about for those clients that are interested in looking at that. And then you can do a tremendous amount more with the Power Platform under either Copilot Studio or natively with AI and SharePoint. So you have a lot of agentic automation that's available in the Microsoft 365. It's just not one place you go. It just is meant to meet you kind of where you're working, which they're working on. When we look at built-in agents, right, as we mentioned for Cloud Enterprise, you can do it with browser and Chrome, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. ChatGPT has it with deep research, Sora, which is now gone to the ether by Sora. Nice to know you. And then the DALL-E is what they do for their images, whereas Copilot's native ones are facilitator, researcher, SharePoint agent, project manager, things of that nature. And then the rest of the stack, a couple things I want to call out. So I'm not reading this. You can all read the slides and when you get the presentation as well. Really important is the connectors. So Microsoft has the broadest connector capability because you can leverage any of the existing connectors that you set up in your tenant, as well as any of the custom connectors that exist as Copilot connectors, and it has full MCP support. Really common misconception around that. And Microsoft is also setting up so MCP is supported natively so that as the vendors that they have Copilot connectors and the Graph connectors for, you can leverage their MCP support directly in platform. So now you're not having to worry about hosting a server somewhere, data governance controls around that, it being attacked by third parties. It'll use identity as the gateway for that stuff. But ChatGPT and Claude also have really good capabilities. Claude is adding more native connectors. Biggest downside to the way that Claude's doing it is you don't necessarily need to be an administrator to add that connector. So if you're not on enterprise, you want to think about which platforms you allow people to access to. Under enterprise, you have to publish them, which is nice. So if you're going to connect to Slack as an example, it'll just use your user credentials to connect to your Slack account, which is nice because then you don't have to worry about going to IT about adding it. But it's bad because if you can log into Slack, you can add it to Claude and have a good time. So it is something to call out is there's less admin control when you look to the far left on adding connectors and MCP servers versus when you look more right on the slide versus how that works there. From a voice and a video perspective, that's where Microsoft 365 Copilot arguably kind of excels since you do get Teams voice. So that's now referred to as Copilot voice. So you can chat directly with Copilot using your voice. It can generate audio, generate video, all that other fun stuff. ChatGPT is losing Sora, as mentioned, but Claude doesn't do any native video support. That's where we're seeing clients that are picking up Gemini, which is obviously missing from this slide today. Pick up Gemini is for that kind of video and image generation, but that's obviously where that excels, Google being kind of the giant in that space versus what our client base is directly interacting with. Google Gemini was the hot thing for a couple of weeks, and then OpenClaw took over, and then Cloud Enterprise took over. So that's really where we're seeing kind of the space evolve. And then
Before
really
we go,
yeah.
Julius, can we press pause for a second? We get some questions. I think Brian's answering some of them, but I want to make sure we sort of shout them out and answer it for the masses. So Adrian asked, with Claude or Copilot, is it possible to restrict AI from accessing content within SharePoint sites? User retains accessibility, but AI doesn't have access.
As Brian beautifully mentioned, Copilot, yes. With Claude, no. The way that the Claude connector works is it's just doing MCP through there. There's no fine granular control anymore because they deprecated their old connector for their newer connector. And when they made that change, you lost that flexibility like you can with ChatGPT Enterprise or Copilot, restrict by certain sites or certain data labels. The way you do it would be data labels with DLP, but your control is all AI or no AI. There's no in between on usage on that DLP control, unfortunately. So you're kind of pigeonholed, at least for now, on the Claude space.
Just to clarify on that, if you turn on the M365 connector for Claude, even the labels don't work. Like you can prevent it from being uploaded to Claude, but you cannot prevent Claude from accessing it through the connector. Whereas with Copilot, you can turn Copilot on or off for SharePoint sites. You can also create data labels, and this is one of the differentiating factors where we talk about the level of integration with Microsoft. In their DLP policies, they have specific policy callouts for restricting Copilot and its access to documents, sites, etc. through labels, but that is a Copilot only feature because of the embedded integration between Microsoft products.
We have another question. We have two Copilot agents, one using SharePoint with Authenticate with Microsoft and one using Direct Docs uploads with no Authentic for external users. We are seeing a retrieval quality difference between the two and want to confirm. Is this due to tenant graph grounding, or is there any way to achieve SharePoint level retrieval quality without requiring authentication?
Hello, Umar. I knew exactly who this was as soon as the question got asked. So this is where you need to provide your agent an identity to be able to do that. And that's where the biggest differentiator comes. So you can you can authorize an account for an unauthenticated agent to use, but you will see a performance hit as well as kind of a tighter context window just due to how it's orchestrating between the unauthenticated request and the authenticated request to keep this as short as I can. But that's something where if you want to chat a bit more, look at that again. It's something we can touch on. But that's just how it does hand off. It's a fun exercise to say the least.
Will Copilot Cowork require a VM or is it self-contained?
So I will answer this with the information I have today. So again, this could change since it is in Frontier. It does not require a VM. It runs inside of Microsoft's cloud. There's a fancy diagram that I can pull up if people are interested at the very end of this on how it's going to orchestrate between it. But the biggest differentiator is it does not require a VM. I'm sure Microsoft's doing some fanciness in the background with resourcing they have to be able to facilitate that. Data connectivity, though, is really where the biggest differentiator is with Copilot Cowork, where it will require you to use data sources that you connect to your Microsoft 365 tenant. That's great because then it'll honor security, it'll honor permissioning, it'll get done through Purview, but you won't have as broad of a MCP support as you get with Claude Cowork. But it does have full kind of Cowork capability there. It has that functionality that most of the people that are familiar with Cowork use. It's just its external data availability will be limited, at least today, to sources that you can directly authenticate to your tenant.
Quick question, our friend John, is ChatGPT 5.4 Pro scheduled to come to Copilot? What is the biggest difference you've seen between 5.4 Pro and the 5.4 Extended Thinking?
Great question, John. So I don't believe 5.4 Pro will become in the Copilot since I believe from an exclusivity perspective, that's tied to ChatGPT Enterprise. Extended Thinking just doesn't have the same air quote length of time allowed to run. That's where Microsoft's achieved that longer runtime and thinking capability through Researcher and some of the changes they've made recently there. But Researcher in the Copilot space is where you want to look at that. And that can be set. I say set, that can be instructed to run in a single instance for up to 2 hours. So it does give you the ability to think longer, think multi-chain, and we have multimodal support there under the Frontier model, which makes it think really well, and those reports it generates is really nice, but that feature set will roll into kind of the core experience. It's not going to be 5.4 Pro, it'll be a research or orchestration between ChatGPT and Claude to achieve that same thinking service, but in the testing that I've been doing the last day or so, it really does a fantastic job now, whereas before a lot of people would mention it was kind of lacking from that capability.
When using Anthropic models with M365 Copilot, who controls the underlying infra, model host and inference? Is it MS or is it Anthropic?
So today, it is controlled by Microsoft.
Okay.
When you came out of beta and moved into, when it came out of preview and moved into general availability, it was set up as what is referred to as a post processor. So it gets processed by Microsoft first. They are hosting the infrastructure for Anthropic in a different location, and then it gets transferred over there. So that's where like they can't put the Anthropic models in different regions due to the current global landscape is the wording I'll use, but they're adjusting those controls. But Microsoft ultimately takes the model, hosts it from that regard. Just to talk about XAI, since I mentioned it before, with XAI, you are transmitting it directly to their side. But today, if you use Anthropic via Copilot, it will honor data labeling. It'll honor everything as we've been mentioning in previously, just because it's being set up as a post processor for the relay of prompting. So.
So Julius, I know you have many more slides to share, but someone asked if you have a slide summarizing the security restrictions in terms of what the agents can and cannot use and what the controls are at the user end. And if the answer is no, you have a friend in marketing that could create that for you.
Thank you. I don't have a slide here for that. That is a good question. Downside to that statement is it changes constantly. And then depending on connector, where you're accessing it, things of that nature, it's very different for all three platforms. And I wouldn't want to give a flying spaghetti monster out. So it's something that we can talk through, Jen, and then we can see if we can get something much more smoother.
Yep,
because
absolutely.
it's very, very vendor specific, unfortunately, today. You would think these platforms would want to like work together to have a streamlined process, but what do I know?
But as we said, they change on the daily in terms of some of that, so it does take some time.
Oh yeah.
All right. That was a good summary of questions. Let's hop back to your slides and we'll see what else we have to uncover.
Yeah. So we covered a lot of the topics here in integration, so I'm going to skip this slide, but for those that want to see it, again, you'll get it as a part of the presentation. It's a lot of what we've kind of already talked about, just nicely bucketed, so you guys have it when you get the presentation. But importantly, into the data handling part is we'll talk a bit about that now. So when we look at security and data handling, right, all three platforms guarantee that by default, if you're using the enterprise versions, they're never being used for training or coaching. You can opt in or opt out of that as well. You can also turn off user feedback, which is nice. Encryption is basically all the same across the board, except for Copilot, since they support TLS 1.3 today, as ChatGPT and Claude are catching up there. Data retention is, again, configurable, just different for each one. Microsoft 365 Copilot, the big differentiator on that space is if you wanted worm storage for those interactions, Copilot has that capability, whereas the other ones don't today. So for those that require that for FINRA or FedRAMP or anything like that, Copilot's unfortunately your only option today. And we look at certifications, that's kind of reflected, right? Microsoft obviously has the most because they are, air quote, the biggest in that space, but that's really where they succeed. Network isolation, you can do it with VPC and Claude, as mentioned previously. They have dedicated enterprise with ChatGPT Enterprise. Important, though, with Claude and ChatGPT is when you are accessing your enterprise accounts, you still have to traverse their public CDNs and their public IPs, which is obviously a big problem. If that gets breached or that gets attacked, they do obviously encrypt in transit, encrypt at rest. How much would be discoverable or viewable if they had a breach is up to when they get breached, and we all find out. But that's something to keep in mind. Whereas Microsoft has a very separate Microsoft Copilot is for consumer, Microsoft 365 Copilot is for business and enterprise. So they have completely separate networking. They don't touch each other ever on the Microsoft side. They have different product teams too, believe it or not. So that's how that works there. And then if you need to be HIPAA, you can get HIPAA ready or HIPAA approved on all of them. For Copilot specifically, you do need E5 to retrieve that. And bring your own key exists for Copilot. It'll be added to Claude soon, and I don't believe ChatGPT Enterprise has any intention of doing bring your own key yet. So that's something to keep in mind there too. When we talk about your data protection, again, a lot of repeat from the previous, but from a DLP perspective, that's really where the biggest differentiator comes from. So with Copilot, you can do everything with Purview DLP. With ChatGPT Enterprise, they integrate with other platforms, so you have to do that protection in that platform. So whether you do that with Zscaler or iBoss or Purview or etc., that's how you control data in, data out. Whereas for Claude, they don't have native support yet. You have to do API level content filtering and a lot of other fun stuff. So if you're not in the space of building that yourself and doing self integrations, we can help you a little bit, but that's something where it's immature on their front today, and something that they're looking to expand kind of over time. And then we talked a bit about network isolation already, but same thing applies there with how Copilot's relying on identity via Entra ID, and then everything you do is tenant level isolation. Same thing with ChatGPT. Claude, you live in the same space as everybody else, just kind of segregated. And then that's only way you can get full isolation, as mentioned, is VPC. And that's, or you can do Vertex AI if you want to do straight API deployments. And then for residency, Copilot is multi-regional, multi-geo supported. So if you have a tenant that is multi-geo for contractual reasons, Copilot does support that today. So if you have one big tenant with users in different regions, it does support keeping the data where it lives. ChatGPT has regional data processing. So depending on where you tell them to set up your tenant as a part of that setup process, it'll go there. And unfortunately for Claude Enterprise, it's only US today. Through API, you can get to the EU, but I don't know how many people are custom building with Anthropic today that would warrant just using the API for that. And then again, from a data governance perspective, Microsoft gives you the most admin level controls. There's a lot of different products that exist in the Microsoft ecosystem, so it's very license dependent. Most of the clients that we set up with Copilot, we do with Microsoft 365 E5 licensing. E7 is around the corner for release 2, so we'll be seeing a lot more clients shifting to that soon as well for that added feature capabilities. But ChatGPT Enterprise is also very mature in that regard. And then from an admin control perspective, again, Claude is one of the weakest in that space, especially from an RBAC perspective. So either you're an owner and you get everything, or you're a user and you get everything, or nothing. It's not as granular as the others, unfortunately, and that's apparent when you look at that. From a usage metrics and auditing and monitoring perspective, Copilot and ChatGPT are the most mature, at least from a native product integration. So again, a lot of our clients use Splunk, use CyberArk, they use all the normal kind of SIM solutions. We use our own XDR platform. We can pull that data in, review it, add it into monitoring. But that's where Claude today, again, requires you to custom build and ingest that data separately, which comes with higher cost, human needs more review, things of that nature. And then from a policy enforcement, everything's done in Purview for Copilot. You can extend that into ChatGPT Enterprise, so you have a single pane of control from that perspective, and then you're able to, you don't have that capability yet with Claude Enterprise. And then lastly, compliance certs, again, is a little bit of a repeat, just structured a little bit different to answer those questions, but a lot of it does come down to retention controls is really the biggest differentiator when you look at kind of this slide, and then what you're doing from data residency. Or actually, is that the same slide? Just not, didn't pull it out. So we'll get that slide deleted. It's the same slide. Cool. So I'm going to hand this off to Bryan really quickly. Bryan, if you could take over kind of data governance, that would be great in that conversation.
Okay, yeah, sure, I can do that. So the things that we look at when it comes to data governance are, are we creating exposures to unexpected exposures of data for our users where they gain access to things that they've always had access to and they just didn't realize it because they didn't know where it was. But now that we have AI and it can go basically crawl all of our data, it's going to go find that. So the oversharing problem is a big one, especially if you're using collaborative tools like SharePoint, Ignite, Box, where it's really easy to just click on a file and share it with somebody. We do have a lot of oversharing reports that come native to Microsoft that we use on data to make sure that before we roll out AI, that data is not overshared. And then also that as users are using the data over time, data doesn't become overshared. So that's a big thing to make sure that we're not creating internal exposures instead of like external exposures where we're exposing our data publicly. We want to make sure that people maintain the proper permissions over time. Stale and ungoverned content, especially as we look at getting the best use out of AI, stale content is a big limiter of your use of AI. When you think about AI, it's great, but it's only as good as the data that it can consume. So the better up to date you keep your data, the better organized you keep your data, the better your results from AI are going to be. We do have some options around lifecycle management that will identify and remove stale data, as well as emerging agents that are able to really analyze your data and then tell you how you can improve it from an AI standpoint as well. When we talk about shadow AI, you may have heard the term shadow IT in the past. This is basically tools that our users are using that we're not aware of, that are either not authorized or not rolled out. From an AI standpoint, these are mostly going to be going and using personal ChatGPTs, their personal Gemini accounts. The big concern here is obviously that those do not have the data protections that their enterprise counterparts do. So if your users are using free ChatGPT and they're uploading your data or copy and pasting your data or simply typing information that shouldn't be disclosed publicly, then that data is more or less becoming publicly exposed. We have seen instances where folks are trying to get that data out of public models. So we want to make sure that you're aware of everything that your users are using from an AI perspective, and that you put policies in place governing what can and can't be done, and then whether you want to enforce those through written policy and pretend we're all adults, or if you want to put technical limitations in place that says users can't use ChatGPT, or they simply can't go to or access any unapproved AI tools. And then classification as a foundation. This is a big thing that we've been doing with a lot of clients lately. We talk a lot about DLP policies, sensitivity labels, making sure that your users are aware of the data that they're accessing and kind of how it fits within your organization is very important from a protection standpoint, as well as if I'm writing a white paper and I access data that is completely, totally confidential, I should know that I'm not allowed to put that in a published white paper, even if I'm writing it myself. So having that classification as the foundation of your data protects your data from AI's usage, but then it also helps your users make important decisions as they're using the data, even if they're allowed to use it with AI, that they're staying within your data usage policies. And one of the big things here, I know we've talked kind of where the different tools align. One of the big draws of Copilot specifically when we're talking about data classification is if you have sensitivity labels and Copilot references a file that is labeled, then the Copilot chat, as well as any artifact produced by that chat, will automatically inherit the most restrictive label of any data accessed during that chat. So this is kind of the process that we go through during our AI assessment phase, our AI readiness assessment phases. These are kind of things that you really want to have in place before you deploy AI. If you've already deployed AI, it's not too late to go back and do them. The first step is just figure out what kind of data you've got, put it into, we usually recommend like 3 to 4 kind of high level labels: public, not public, highly confidential. Sometimes you have more specific sub-labels under that, but just knowing what data you have and then what rules apply to the different sets of data. Obviously enforcing the principle of least privilege. This means if you don't have access, you don't need access to it, you shouldn't have access to it. The more places you grant organization-wide access, the more places data accidentally becomes overshared. So you really want to reduce your permissions to just what is needed for everyone. Then we start talking about DLP policies. This is where we're enforcing what AI can access, what it can't, what people can upload to various AIs, what they can't, et cetera. Lifecycle retention, going back to the stale data. Do we want to keep data that's old? Do we want to archive it? Do we want to move it to cold storage? And then from a retention standpoint, I know this came up in the Q&A. I was answering it as Julius told me to take over here, but for regulated industries, there are retention policies you can put in place to maintain your Copilot chats. You can, I say Copilot, I use Copilot all the time. For most of your AI chats, you can retain those. The retention on the SEC side right now is still pretty unclear, but what I personally am seeing talking to compliance officers who are talking to the SEC, they don't necessarily want to see every single AI interaction you have. The two things they want to see are, one, are you using AI to drive decision making? And if you are, they want to be able to see that process. And then two, as we get into agents and more agentic flows, they want to know that you have oversight of your agents and your agent ecosystem, your digital workforce, as Microsoft calls it, to know what its permissions are, what its access is, and what actions it's taking in your environment. And then monitor and iterate. This is good for AI, it's just good for everything in general. We do enable tracking in Purview to track what your users are doing, what type of data is being uploaded, accessed, et cetera. And it's a good idea to just review this, quarterly, maybe semi-annually, and see if you need to make updates to your AI usage policies. It's also a great time to review tools and tools access. If you have more than one AI tool, you should have a sitting policy or standing policy for how often you review those tools to see if their permissions need to change, or if potentially that you have a core tool that has taken their place and you need to keep using them.
Awesome. Bryan, Julius, we have about 4 minutes left. What have we not covered? What can we cover in 4 minutes? And I just want to put a shout out to the audience. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. Of course, we always have follow-up webinars. We will have a ton of content to share with you after this webinar. But if you do have any last-minute questions in the last 3 to 4 minutes that we have, please put them in the chat.
I have 2 points I want to make very quickly. The first one, you'll see, like if you go back and review this, you'll see there are multiple references to multi-model as well as multimodal. And those are actually 2 different things. Multi-model means you're accessing different models. It could be all the models within OpenAI or Claude, or it could be, you know, a breadth of multiple companies. And that's what multi-model means. Multimodal means models that are capable of doing voice, text, screen vision, etc. So it's different ways of it being able to pull in the data. So when you look at that, those aren't misspellings. Multi-model and multimodal are 2 different things. And then the second thing I want to add, because I think it's important for why I think people came today, this is from a McKinsey research, which I think was probably one of the ones that Julius referenced earlier. It says the single strongest predictor of broad adoption is whether the AI tool lives inside the user's existing work environment. So.
Yep, that's a good point. So I know Martin has a question effectively around how sensitive company data or PI is used in AI tools and having those models learn. So importantly here with the enterprise versions, right, you get the guarantee that they're not training, coaching, transforming on your data. It's part of their data guarantee with you. Again, locked in on the enterprise versions of those. You get that kind of protection. The real concern when you look at it from a governance perspective is if someone's used that information to generate content, where does it go then? So is that being shared inadvertently to someone who didn't know they had access to it? Is that being labeled, classified, identified so that it can't go somewhere it's not supposed to go? And that's really where Purview really starts to come into the fray. And a little bit why I have the slide up on here around how native interactions with Purview Copilot kind of help, since the entire interaction gets labeled versus when you look at Claude and ChatGPT, they don't have any native support. They're relying on a third party, at least with ChatGPT, for you to do that, whereas Claude doesn't have native support yet, or third-party support. So that really just comes down to kind of how you want your data to flow and where you want it to be allowed to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, on the E5 versus E7, just real quick, E7 is basically going to be E5 plus Copilot plus Agent 365, which is that agent control plane that Julius referenced earlier, plus the Intune suite, which if you're not familiar has Cloud PKI, some better not conditional access, some better application rollout catalogs for Intune app deployment, a couple other things within the Intune suite, but it's essentially E5 plus Copilot plus Agent 365 plus the Intune suite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's and then the price today for E7 will be $100 a user a month. So you save $20 going into it versus all the other license packs. Waiting to hear from Microsoft if they're going to run promotion on a discount on that for the first year, like they do with a number of their other offerings. But there will be a price increase, so everyone here is aware of it. So you can go tell all your friends. In June, there will be a price increase on all Microsoft licensing. That's not driven through ECI; it's coming direct from Microsoft. So that'll turn into, in most cases, a $24 to $28 savings stepping into that E7. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So a couple quick questions have come in. One of them, and yes, Yvonne, we will. If you have it, can ECI send around, the best way to archive data on SharePoint for the purposes of cleaning data to use by Copilot? We can send out a helpful hint there. We do have that. And then Adrian had, so far, we've seen that users stop trying to use Copilot. It was in their environment, but it didn't return useful responses. Once they tried Claude, they experienced rich, useful responses that they loved and are talking about. Talk to me again about Copilot and Claude being best friends and working together under the same roof, Julius.
Yeah. So what I see a lot happens in that exact light is they are using either the free Copilot and it's not really the same as when you look at using even free Claude. And then clients that use Microsoft 365 Copilot and that we've enabled to use the new Claude experiences and or are using agent mode for a lot of the stuff now, edit with Copilot now, they're seeing much more rich, fruitful responses. So that sentiment is very accurate when you look at the free Copilot versus what you get when you pay for Copilot, is where I see the biggest differentiator there. I'm not sure if Bryan agrees or disagrees there, but what it comes down to a lot is all of them require a little bit of a difference in how you interact with. Prompting with ChatGPT is different than prompting with Claude, which is different from prompting with Microsoft 365 Copilot. As Bryan told me yesterday, we're not supposed to call it prompt engineering anymore. It's conversations. So you really do need to look at how users are prompting and where they're prompting to get those outcomes. A lot of the clients and that I work with directly in a lot of the enablement and education front, once we go through kind of standard structured, like here's what it looks like, here's what you do from there, that's where they start to see kind of the light behind that, where that works. And then the biggest differentiator when you start using the licensed Microsoft 365 Copilot is where is all your other data? Can Copilot see it? How is that connected? Is that overshared, undershared? Like there's a lot involved to make Copilot great. It comes down to what they've built with Context IQ and Work IQ, where it has contextual understanding of content. So clients that we see with high adoption are using more of the Microsoft suite. So if you're using Planner, if you're leveraging all the native collaboration features that come with the Office suite, if you're putting data in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, like you're actually using the full stack, they see the highest level of adoption, the highest level of success, the highest level of like happy end users. So it comes down to where is the rest of your data, what was prompted, what was expected, because that's usually where there's also a big disconnect where they prompt, they expect one thing, but if Copilot or any AI tool didn't know what you expected, either it's going to make assumptions, which is not what Copilot's designed to do. It's designed to answer the question that you put in there, versus where Claude and ChatGPT, based on the memory, they'll explore, they'll think about how you may want to think about it, and that's the biggest differentiator. And when you look at enterprises and what Microsoft has built for big business, that's not what those businesses want. They want very clear, here's the answer to the question, no run-on, no run-off, no exploratory. They've peppered that in because that's what people want now from AI, but that's very much where the prompt becomes more important. And when we go through education with clients, we normally take the approach of like, what did you expect to get? We look at what was prompted, and then we can piece together on why it got that way or why it answered the question in that light. But with Claude and Copilot now, it is significantly better at like my intent. Personalization is in Frontier today, so it'll personalize, write emails for me. I have to click the button to send that everybody wants from the chat for Outlook, things of that nature. So a lot of the features that exist that everybody likes to see, Microsoft very clearly identified that as a gap in what they've produced, and they're slowly shifting that into be a part of the core experience. And a lot of what I'm talking about will be generally available Q2. So it'll be here, air quote.
Excellent. Julius, Bryan, thank you so much for today. It seems like we could go on for probably another hour, so it definitely feels like there will be a follow-up next month. To everyone that attended, thank you. We will be sending out the recording. We'll send out notes. We'll also send out the deck. And we talked about a few pieces that we will pull together, cheat sheets, if you will. So if you are our clients, they will be on the client portal. And if you are not our clients, you should be reaching out directly, and we can make sure we get that to you. So with that said, thank you both, and we will all look forward to the next one.
Yeah, thanks everybody.